Hi class, this is Dr. Kirsten, and this is the second half of Lesson 12 in Module 5 for Grade 4 of EngageNY Math. So there was a power surge, which I don't know if you guys noticed in the previous video, and it kind of messed up the way it was recording. So again, I have to split this up into two different videos. The first one is the lesson and problem 1 from the problem set, which we finished. And then I was actually just about to get into problem 2, so I guess the timing wasn't so bad. So now for problem 2, and I'm just going to jump into this. You need to watch the first video if you haven't watched it already. I'm just going to jump straight into this problem and right where we are and do it. Now for this one, I'm not going to do a perfect number line. Again, I'm just going to really focus on doing a quick sketch because that is the idea, for us to use benchmarks to really kind of understand where these fractions would fall on this number line. So we have 0, a half, and 1. So let's look at 11/12. And if I look at 11/12, I know that 12/12 would be 1 whole, and I can see that 11/12 is super close to 12/12. It's just 1/12 away. And if you remember our fractions and our fraction strips and the number line that I drew, 12ths are really tiny compared to, say, fourths and even eighths. So I know that 11/12 is going to be way up here somewhere. Right around there. So now I already have that drawn in for us. So now let's go ahead and let's take a look at a quarter. And a quarter is actually super easy for me to think about. It's going to be halfway between 0 and a half, and I just know that from working with fractions. But even if you didn't, you would know that it's going to be less than 2/4, which is a half, because remember, if the numerator is half of the denominator, so this would be 2/4 right here, would be 1/2. And I know it's going to be somewhere in between there. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put it right here, because I know that it's right there. Because I'd have 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 4/4. Okay, so now let's go ahead and let's take a look at 3/8. So now 3/8 is really close again to a half. If I were to look at 8 and I were to think about what is half of 8, I know 4 is. So in this case, 4/8 is equivalent to 1/2. 3/8 is a little less than that. Now here's where we have to start thinking. So 3/8 is 1/8 less than a half, or I could also, and 1/4 is 1/4 away from a half. You have to think, like, who's going to be closer to a half? Well, I know that these pieces are a lot smaller. So if this is only 1 away from a half, I know that it's going to be closer to a half. So I could even go ahead and say that it's going to be about here. The other way to look at that would be to say, like, a quarter is how far away from 0 and 3/8, but it's really easier to compare it to the half, to say that this is going to be further away because it's one of these pieces away, and these pieces are bigger because the denominator is a smaller number. And this is 1/8 away from a half. So if this is 1/8 away from a half, because 4/8 would be a half, then this guy's going to be a lot closer to a half. And now what we can do is we can go ahead and we can say, so select two fractions from part A, use the given number line to compare them by writing greater than, less than, or equal to. Remember, the alligator eats the larger number. So let's compare a quarter and 3/8. So I have a quarter, and I have 3/8. And what I can see is that a quarter is less than 3/8. And then it says, explain how you plotted the points in part A. Sorry guys, hold on. Let me pause and straighten you out. Oh, maybe I can do it. Oh my goodness. Sorry guys. Hold on. Give me a sec. Alright, so I'm sorry about that I'm still not really lined up very well. But anyway, let me bring this down. There we go. Okay. So there's a couple different ways that we could explain this. Since we were just doing a quick sketch this time, which is really showing that we're comfortable with this concept of using these benchmarks and thinking of how far away we are from 0, a half, and 1, I could say that. And I could say that, for example, I used for 11/12, I knew that it was very close to the benchmark of 1, and we could explain that 3/8 is very close to 1/2, and that a quarter is halfway between 0 and a half. we could talk about that. I'm not going to go into depth in writing this down here for us right now, as long as you feel comfortable explaining this. I will be posting the answers for you, as you know, tomorrow. The other reason that I don't want to go into detail with it is because we didn't actually decompose like we did in problem 1. Remember that problem 1, we actually went ahead and we decomposed a third into twelfths, and we decomposed 5/6 into 10/12. So we did actually go through all the work, and we could talk about decomposing if I were, let's say, explaining how we did this number line, that we actually did the work to decompose. But the point is for us to be getting comfortable with doing these quick sketches, or even, like we're about to do in the next problem set, not even using them. And here, the idea is for us to really be doing this without doing a sketch. So let me try and straighten us out here. Okay, so let's take a look at this one. Compare the fractions given below by writing greater than, less, or less than on the number lines. Give a brief explanation for each answer, referring to the benchmarks, 0, a half, and 1. So again, we're going to be looking for how close we are to 0 or 1, or how close we are to 1/2. So keep that in mind as we're doing these. I am actually going to be doing, I think 5 of them with you is what I decided. And then I'll let you do the others, but I am going to give you a hint on one of them. So you're not going to have a lot of work to do on your own, but you're watching a lot of videos today. So let's start by taking a look here. And if I look at these two numbers, I can see that 1/2 clearly is equal to 1/2. Now let's look at 3/4. Well, again, if I'm dividing something up or splitting something up into quarters, I know that a whole is 4/4, 4/4. And let me just jot that up top for you, just so you know what I'm talking about. This would be equal to 1, and half of that would be 2/4, or 2/4. So 2/4 would be the halfway point. Well, clearly, if 2/4 is equivalent to a half, then having 3/4, having 3 of those, is going to be greater than a half. So 3/4 is definitely going to be greater than a half because it's greater than 2/4. It would fall in right in between these guys. So it's halfway between those two. So again, this is the concept of what we are trying to do in this lesson here, is to get comfortable talking about these fractions. And I could write that 3/4 is greater than 1/2. I'm sorry, I'm being like kind of messy. Okay, let's take a look at B. So I'm going to slide it over a little. So here we're comparing a half again, which is really nice, to 7/8. So if I'm comparing a half to 7/8, what I know is that a half is right there. 7/8 is almost equal to 8/8. I know that 8/8, and I'll jot it up here for us, I know that 8/8 is 1 whole. Well, 7/8 is just going to be 1/8 away from that 8/8, and I happen to know that 4/8 is going to be the half. So I know that's a half. So clearly 7/8 is much larger. So again, I'm going to go ahead and show that 7/8 is larger than 1/2, or 1/2 is smaller than 7/8. And the logic that I used was that 7/8 is much closer to 1. So I'm going to write that. 7/8 is closer to 1. So this is again how we're supposed to be getting comfortable with these fractions. So let's try another one here. Let's look at C. And this is just really a funky angle, so let's see if I can straighten that out for us a little. Okay, so now we're talking about 2/3 and 2/5. So what I need to think about is maybe, remember how we talked about thirds, and that they didn't really line up perfectly with the halfway mark. And I know that I really shouldn't be sketching this, but I just want to emphasize this to you. So if I had a number line, and I have 0, and I have 1, and then I split this into thirds, this would be 1/3, and this is 2/3. This would be halfway. You can see I just divided my number line in half. So 1/3 is less than it and 2/3 is greater than it. This is something that you just need to start getting comfortable with, is that 1/3 would be less than 1/2 and 2/3, and here's your half, would be greater than it. So let's get back to this one. So I know that 2/3 is greater than 1/2. What about 2/5? Well, let's think about 2/5. Think about fifths. It also doesn't divide perfectly evenly. So if I were to think about my fifths, and here, let's see if I can fit this in our screen. So here, if I have my fifths, you can see that it doesn't divide evenly. I have a fifth and a fifth, a fifth and a fifth. So one of those, this third guy, the one in the middle, is going to have to be split in half if I'm going to have it evenly. So I know that 2/5 is going to be less than the halfway mark. So that's something else that you have to start getting really comfortable with. Again, I'm going to be posting those for you guys. So what I do know is that 2/5 is going to be less than 1/2. And I do know that 2/3, if I had 1/2, 2/3 is going to be greater than 1/2. So now what I know is that since this is greater than 1/2 and this is less than 1/2, it's going to look like that. I know we're not supposed to be doing number lines, but I just want to make sure you guys are not confused with this idea. So really quickly, if I'm doing this, so if I had 0, 1/2, and 1, again, 2/3 is going to be over here somewhere. So if I were to divide this into thirds, it would be right around here. So I'm going to say that it's like right here. So that's about 2/3. And then again, we said that 2/5 is less than 1/2. So it doesn't really matter. Let's just kind of put it right there. It's going to be close to 1/2, but it's definitely going to be less than it. So now you can clearly see that 2/3, oh, I went off screen. I'm so sorry, guys. Now you can clearly see that 2/3 is greater than 1/2. 2/5 is less than 1/2. So 2/5 is less than 2/3. Okay. Or 2/3 is greater than 2/5 in our problem. All right, let's take a look at this one. So 3/5 is going to be greater than 1/2. We know that because, again, if I looked at my fifths, and I remember what my fifths look like, this is where my halfway is. So look, 1, 2, 3/5 is definitely going to be more than halfway. Or if I did a quick sketch just to remind myself, and I split this up, I had 0 and 1, and I put my fifths in there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 3/5 is definitely going to be larger than that half. And these are, again, numbers that you need to start feeling comfortable with. I'm not going to decompose it into tenths or anything like that. We're going to work with these numbers. So this is going to be, I know 3/5 is a little bit greater than 1/2. What about 9/10 though? Well, 9/10 is super close to 1 whole because I know that 10/10 is 1 whole. So since 10/10 is a whole, 9/10 is really close to that. So again, if I were just really quickly sketching, this would be almost 1. So this is a little bit bigger than 1/2. This is almost 1. So since he's almost 1 whole, he's going to be bigger than being a little bit bigger than 1/2. So I hope this is starting to make a little bit of sense. If you're super stuck, do a quick sketch of that one. I don't mind, just so you understand it. So if here's 1, that's a bad spot for 1/2. It's just a little too close. So if that's 1/2 and this is 0, 9/10 is going to be like right here. And 3/5 is going to be like right there. So clearly he's bigger than him. But now we have to flip it to show it there. Okay. So let me show you one more problem really quick, and then I'm going to give you a hint on one of the problems. So 1/3, and oh, you know what? I didn't write down how I'm explaining this. So again, here what I said it. 9/10 is close to 1, and 3/5 is really very close to a half. So we'll say that 3/5 is close to 1/2. It's just a teensy bit bigger than it. Okay, so that was logic, and I didn't write my logic over here for us. So here, what I said was 2/3 is greater. Well, I did it here. 2/3 is greater than 1/2, and then I said that 2/5 is less than a half. So I wrote it mathematically, but we could write it. 2/3 is greater than a half, and 2/5 is less than 1/2. So I've been doing it mathematically. So let's look at this one really quickly. I'm skipping that one. That one's for you. It's a nice easy one. Let's take a look at 1/3 and 2/4. So again, for this one, what I want you to focus on, I'm just going to give you a hint, is to take a look and find your halves. This is equal to a half because 2 is half of 4. So I know that 2/4 is equal to a half. So that's going to be one of the things that you're going to write here, is that 2/4 is equal to a half. Well, I know that 1/3 is less than a half. And we know that because that's one of those benchmarks that we should know, that 1/3 is less than a half. And we just drew that out before. So now, since you know this is equal to a half and this is less than a half, everyone should be able to write that in yourselves. So I'm not going to write that one in. I'm going to let you guys write that one in after we kind of worked it through. But I will give you this hint. Now I just wanted to jump down to the bottom. And here, when you are doing this problem, and this one too, just remember, what would be a half? Use your halves as a benchmark. What is half of 100? What is half of 16? Is this bigger than or less than that half? Is this bigger than or less than that half? So that's your hint for these. Same sort of thing here. What is your halfway mark? So what is half of 100? What's half of 16? Use those as your benchmarks. I will definitely be posting how to do these tomorrow. So after you guys have had a chance to do it and have turned in your work to me, I will be posting this for you. Okay, I hope that all of this made sense. I hope that you're starting to get a feel for benchmarks. Like I said, I'm going to be posting I'm going to be attaching some useful things for you to use in our Google Classroom, and I will see you all tomorrow bright and early. Have a great day. Bye, class.